Hello, and welcome back to A Level Deeper, a show where everything is made up and the points don't matter. Hopefully that's a reference that you got. Call in if that's a reference that you got. My name is Chad Miles. I am the host of this podcast, and today I have another conversation for you that I am happy to say was recorded face-to-face. I've been investing into my in-person podcast setup recently. Got some new mics, got some new recording equipment so that I can do more in-person shows. The first one was the recording I did with my mom. The second one was the sort of botched show, but behind the scenes conversation that I filmed with my wife, Eileen, last week on the show. And now the third one is a conversation with a friend, Brian Rogers. It was cool to be able to go to Brian's house, sit down together in his living room and have a conversation. And that model, when I first envisioned this show, that was what I thought about, was going to people, existing in different spaces, meeting people in different spaces, all around the idea of still creating this space where I could sit down with someone, have a conversation about their life and their perspectives and their experiences. And that's just kind of what I pictured. You know, my wife and I live and travel in our van, and as we travel the country, what I'd love to be able to do is start having these conversations with people in different states and maybe in different countries, at least maybe like Canada and Mexico. There's something about taking the show on the road and meeting different people in different places as we travel along that's really appealed to me. And so as I get this in-person setup dialed in, which I feel like is getting there, I like to start bringing more of these conversations where I'm going to people and sitting down and chatting. Anyway, I had a great time with Brian. He's someone who is a friend of Eileen's and someone that I've gotten to know over the past few years as well. Our conversation reminded me of the power of the show because you either assume you know things about people or, frankly, you just don't know a lot about people in general. So you meet someone and you think you're familiar with their story, and then all of a sudden you sit down and have a conversation for an hour and you learn so much about someone. You learn so much about what they've gone through and what shaped them, and it's a reminder that the person that you interact with each day when you're interacting with someone, that person has a story. They have a history. They've gone through so many things to get to the point and to be the person that you might be interacting with at that given moment. And this conversation with Brian was a reminder of that. As you'll hear in just a few moments, I opened up the conversation asking Brian about the chapter of his life that he is currently in, and that led us down this whole path of exploring some of the different events and moments and things that have happened both in this current chapter of Brian's life and many of the things that have led to this chapter. Things like a horrible car accident that led to a lot of physical and mental and emotional pain for Brian. Things like his almost decade-long healing journey and healing physically and healing from using opioids and healing mentally and emotionally. Things like finding different tools and hobbies along the way. Things like yoga and teaching spin classes. And all these different things that have led Brian to this current chapter of his life. We ended our conversation with a really powerful discussion about Brian's parents and his relationship to them. We talked about the power of forgiveness and the power of perspective in our lives, and so many more things that made this conversation both an enjoyable one, an insightful one, and just another great example of hearing someone's story. And I took a lot from this conversation. And what's fun is that I trust that you'll take a lot from this conversation as well. And it's probably going to be different things than I took away from it. And that's the fun of listening to each of these conversations, even when I listen to them back myself. All right, anyway, let's get to the conversation with Brian Rogers. It's up next on A Level Deeper. And by the way, if you didn't catch my reference in the beginning, that was a reference to the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? All right, here's Brian. So, you've maybe heard me say before that the extent of my prep for these conversations is usually like going on someone's Instagram. For whatever reason, I wasn't following you until today, and then I went on your Instagram, and your Instagram was private.
Oh, yep.
And I had a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to what am I gonna, I can't prepare. And it's a forever interesting experience of how I go into these conversations. But one thing on your profile that was private that I could see was your bio. One phrase that was on the bio of your Instagram was, "You are the author of your own story." I feel like that's one of those phrases that we sort of hear and we're like, yeah, okay, that's right. Of course, that makes sense. I want to hear some of your thoughts on what that means to you. First, I'm curious if we were to label this chapter of Brian's story that he is writing, what would the title of this chapter be? And what's this chapter about?
Man, the title of this chapter, and oddly, each chapter has kind of fallen to each decade of my life. I'm approaching 40 years old, 39 right now, turning 40 in November. And as I approach this new decade, I'm thinking that my chapter, this new chapter that I'm coming into, is serving and shining light onto the world. And through writing this story of my own, it's kind of come from all of the different things that have come up leading up to this point, having the ability, the power to say, this is what I want my life to look like. I want to be able to lean into the things that truly make me happy. And a lot of that comes from living authentically, living your authentic life. And what does that look like? What feeds your soul? What feeds you and makes you want to go forward and further into the things that make you happy? When I think about like the chapters of my life, it's funny. I came across something, it was a little while back, and I don't follow zodiac signs so much closely, but one thing I saw really resonated with me, that there's actually 3 stages to each zodiac sign. Have you ever heard of this?
No, I'm not super. I'm not that familiar with zodiac.
Okay. And I'm not super familiar either, but when I saw this, it resonated because it really reminded me of my story. And stage 1 is kind of like innately who we are, how we're born, the things that people tell us we are, what the world tells us we are. And this is, I think, I imagine it for me, a younger age. And then stage 2 is kind of this like crisis stage of being between who you thought you were and who you're becoming. And then stage 3 is the actual becoming and learning the life that really was meant for you and living life on your terms. And if I'm talking about my story, my journey, I feel like I've kind of gone through all 3 of these stages early on, at a young age. It can be things of struggle. It can be things of growth, transformation. And I think that's kind of what leads you through all of those stages. And I say this because there's one pivotal moment of my life that really shifted and changed everything. And you have kind of your mantra. It's whatever you do in life, make it meaningful. And I love that. There was something that happened in my life early on, young 20s, that shifted my mindset of just living life. And honestly, at young 20s, I was out hanging out with friends, partying a lot, drinking a lot, just really what young 20-year-olds do. Nothing was wrong with that so much. But when I was 22 or 23, I was in a really bad car accident. I was the passenger in a vehicle. The driver kind of had this challenge where he wanted to see how fast he could go down the street. And he was newer to this neighborhood. My other roommate and I have lived in this area for a long, long time, so very familiar with it. The driver, he was new to this area. And we lived on the corner just at the end of the street before that street ended. And so he was speeding down the street, didn't realize when the end was coming, ended up crashing into a tree doing about 70 miles per hour. And I was in the front passenger seat, no seatbelt on. Somehow I survived that. Dashboard's on my lap, impact of the tree right in front of me. And through all of that, surviving that, coming through out of that, the mantra kind of that I set on my life was, wow, this is a second chance, honestly. And I want to live with intention. I want to say yes, always remind myself to say yes to opportunity. And that's kind of what my mantra had become, say yes to opportunity. And from that point going forward, many things shifted in my life, lifestyle, through big struggles after that, but also an upward trend in growth, transformation, and so on. Changed my world, changed my life. And when I think of those zodiac signs that I mentioned, mine's Scorpio. And the 3 stages of the Scorpion is the first. The Scorpion tends to be guarded, protected. The second stage is an eagle. Eagle is a creature that soars high, gains new perspective on life, and kind of learns that, for me, pain is not my identity. Because in my 20s, I was living a life full of pain based on my injuries that I had from that car accident.
Physical pain
that led to mental struggles as well. And the third stage of Scorpio is the Phoenix. And this is where it really resonates with me, because the Phoenix is rebirth, transformation. And that's the point where I feel like I've gone through all 3 of those phases. And in my 30s, that was like my awakening. It was about when I turned 30 years old, when I needed to create a new change in my life. And that was my reawakening. And I think of the Phoenix, and it's not just one time, one transformation, you're done. I've transformed many times throughout my life. And even now, to the point where in my 30s, when that really started to grow with me into these new areas, new avenues of life, just continue to evolve, continue to evolve.
What makes you, so you said when you were turning 30, you recognized you needed to make another change or transformation in your life. What led you to that belief?
Well, in my 20s, part of what came with my injuries, in this car accident, I broke my back. I had a spinal fusion, L1 to L3. They had to put rods and screws in. Kind of gruesome, brutal here, but a piece of metal went through my knee, tore ligaments in my shoulder. So I had lots of surgeries. That car accident led me to be in the hospital for almost 2 weeks in intensive care. So again, so blessed that I was able to walk away from that somehow, some way. Even in the hospital, I remember there was a point in time where I lost feeling in my legs, like a day after the back surgery. I was honestly in tears. I was terrified. They had to bring in a therapist to talk to, like trying to walk me through what it could be, what it couldn't be. But if this is what it is, there's support and so on and so forth. Thankfully, luckily, it was just with the stress of the surgery, pressure on nerves, things like that. Feeling in my legs did end up coming back, but it was terrifying. But with all of that, those injuries, unfortunately, part of that recovery, especially at that time, was pain management through opioids. And at 23 years old, that is a substance that there's just been a total crisis in the world over. because of how addictive it is, the consequences that can happen when you're taking substances like that. And unfortunately, that was required for me to feel any sort of normalcy in my life. I was living in a lot of pain for a really long time, and going to pain management doctors. They do injections in my back. They do cortisone shots. But the one continuous thing they would say is, this is just the nature of your injury. And this is what you're going to have to do to feel just okay.
How do you feel in a moment like that when you get a message? Someone saying essentially, this is what you're going to have to do for the rest of your life.
Defeated. That's not a way for anybody to have to live. And I felt stuck. And honestly, it put me through a long term of depression, that this pain is going to be forever. This style of pain management is going to be forever. And the problem, just a bigger problem, it snowballs, is that this was going on for 7 years before I decided, with help, that I needed to make a change. And part of that is because when you start, you might have your dosages of 2 every 8 hours or whatever it might be. But when you're on it, taking these medications for 7, 8 years, 2 every 8 hours stops doing the job. Your body becomes dependent on it. And your body wants more. So 2 every 8 hours might turn into 3 every 8 hours, or 4 every 8 hours. And down the line, that is what happened for me. Then you find yourself in situations, the math doesn't add up. This is supposed to last me 30 days. That stops happening. So then I'm running out of medication. When that happens, your body does terrible things to you, trying to go get your refills 3, 4, 5 days early, and then living that type of life week in, week out, month in, month out, is a really tough way to live. Thankfully, I had someone in my life who went through very similar pain management, and she had told me about a medication that helped to get off of those types of opioids. So I looked into it, went to see a new doctor, and it helped. It did. The good thing is it helped me stop using those types of medications. And what this new medication does is it actually blocks the receptors of your brain from withdrawal. The problem was that medication as well is a controlled substance, also an addictive substance. Where it worked well for me is, well, with the previous medication I was on, I was needing much more than what my dosage was prescribed. With this new medication, 25% of it was enough to do the job, to block those receptors from feeling the withdrawal symptoms. And over the course of, it was probably 3 years on this new medication. And even then I was still feeling defeated because I'm never going to be able to stop taking this medication. And this is right about when my 30s began. And I'll never forget the day. I was actually camping up north, camping with my family and family friends. And I was just super tired one night. This new medication that I was taking, it was taken in the morning, take it at night. And if I forgot, your body is going to start reacting. The sweats, the skin crawling, all of that. I remember falling asleep in my tent, just super tired, and I forgot to take that medication. When I woke up the next morning, I felt fine. And it was just my eyes just shot open. I was like, is this for real? And since that day, never needed anything ever again. And that was my kind of awakening. there was also some, at least to help with the pain that I was going through. I actually had the girl I was dating at the time. She had recommended. She said, "You should get a second opinion on your back. Go see my doctor," because the doctors I was seeing constantly said, "It's just the nature of your injury. It's just the nature of your injury." I go in to get new imaging done, and sure enough, they look at it and say, "Your fusion that you had, the hardware that in there to support that fusion, 2 of the screws are broken. And that's likely a big cause of a lot of the pain that you're having. Course of action, open you back up, take that hardware out." And it was needed to happen. And since that surgery, it was life-changing. It truly did the job to help eliminate a ton of that pain. I still have residual pain, achiness, soreness, stiffness from it, but not nearly as debilitating as what it used to be.
What do you attribute? So you go through this experience, you have this night in the tent, and you expect that, if you don't take your medication, you're going to wake up and you're going to be in a load of pain, and that wasn't the case. So what did you take from that? What did you attribute that to? What happened there?
I truly think it was just my body finally telling me, like, you don't need this anymore. And I never gave myself the opportunity really to allow my body to find out. So when that happened, it was just that reminder of, I'm on a new path. And this is a chance for me to go in a new direction and lean into this new direction. The universe is telling you that you have a chance to live differently than you have been. And it's just this new, like, radiant light that's shining on you. Like, just I felt just this warmth, this excitement. And that's part of why I say, like, this reawakening. And my life shifted in some great ways after that. The 20s, and you had Kelly McMullen on your show, and I love this term she uses. She uses the term sleepwalking. And my 20s, that's what I felt like I was doing, sleepwalking. Being on those medications, it affected my life in so many different ways. The one good thing that I took away from it, or was smart enough, is that I stopped drinking, because mixing those two things can be terrible, fatal. But also, because of that, I stopped drinking. I actually lost connection with a lot of great friends, because that was their lifestyle. Again, still young 20s, but that was their lifestyle. People that I would always say will always be friends of mine, but not nearly as close as we used to be. And then the challenge of going through that time in my life was just full of depression, having to live that way. Even some of my closest friends knew there was an issue going on, because I couldn't leave the house without having the bottle of medication in my pocket. I walk around sounding like there's a rattle in my pocket, because all you hear is the rattling of the pills bouncing around in the bottle. So being able to shift from that lifestyle to the lifestyle of freedom, that was honestly one of the most, to this day, the most proud things that I've achieved or accomplished in life, being able to put that chapter behind me.
I mean, freedom is such a big thing. Like I talk about that often when we're talking about Eileen and I's, my wife, our lifestyle and living in the van. And one of the reasons that we chose that lifestyle was in pursuit of freedom. Like, I think there's something we all want autonomy in our lives. We want to be able to choose to do things because we choose to do them. So I've got to imagine, I can just feel how powerful of a difference that would be, where you're going through a whole, almost decade of your life without feeling like you have freedom. Like you can't go about making these day-to-day choices of what you're going to do and how you're going to live, because those choices are seemingly being made for you. That freedom is such a powerful, powerful thing.
Absolutely is. And with that, I talk about, like, this reawakening and this shift in lifestyle. Things happen. the way they're meant to happen. And sometimes things line up in special ways that show you a new path. And with that, for me, it all kind of lined up in this lifestyle shift because I started taking my own health and well-being into consideration. Before that, all I was doing was damaging my body. And that was a big part of why I needed to make the change, because I knew I couldn't live that way forever. If I did, who knows what the end result would be. Either I'm destroying my body for the next 20 years, and I don't even want to think of how bad it could have gotten. You hear stories, you see them on the news or documentaries of the opioid pandemic, and where it leads people is terrible things. So being able to make that shift and the way it worked out, and a lot of it stemmed from after that second surgery I had. It was actually scary because it was just before that surgery when I was made the shift of medications and stopped taking it. But then you go through a surgery, they offer that same medication back to you. So having the mindset of like, okay, I can't settle back into this same type of recovery. I was able to make it through after that surgery. But at the same time, going through physical therapy, once physical therapy ended, I was kind of still going through a tough time in my life because while I was finally off of that, I still didn't necessarily like who I saw in the mirror. I wasn't confident in myself. The previous 8-10 years or so still had a big impact on me and formed me, molded me into this person who I am, and still like trying to figure out, okay, who is this new person going to be? But it lined up well with that. At the same time, I was finishing my physical therapy. My sister, she was just finishing her personal training certifications. When I think of like, okay, I don't like this person that I'm seeing in the mirror, truly physically and mentally, because part of being on those medications for so long, you don't have an appetite. I was skin and bones. I didn't have confidence, and my relationship at that time had just ended. So with my sister doing that personal training, I said, okay, you know what? Maybe I'll go to the gym. And this is the first time that I was able to step into something, to do something that felt like was for me, to serve me. And as that road unfolded, I got more into the training aspect, the strengthening aspect, which helped physically, helped my injuries that I had gone through, strengthening those areas to support those areas. But it just continued to evolve and evolve and evolve into, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I'm starting to see results. It's not so much about what you're doing at the gym, but what you're doing before or after the gym, the nutrition. So all of that just started to work for me. And I saw the benefits. I felt better than ever. I saw results that I've never seen in my life before. And all that did was just encourage me to do more, research more, learn more. So that was my awakening as I grew through this new transformation, the Phoenix. What I would say would be the first stage of my Phoenix.
When you mentioned, there's this period where like you would look in the mirror and not like who you saw physically. I don't know if you said mentally or emotionally, but it was one of the two.
Both, really.
Oh, okay,
more emotionally, I would say. Yeah.
And you had this opportunity then to make the conscious choice of who, from that point on, you wanted to be. What were some of the characteristics or qualities of the person that you wanted to become?
I think that's when I first started the mindset of leaning into myself. and having the just personal growth, somebody that had this light growing within them, still dim at the time, but feeling it grow brighter and brighter, and wanting to get to the point where I could let that light shine, be radiant to the rest of the world, because it was a challenge for a long time. And I've always been a pretty open guy. I've always have the mindset of living life of kindness, of spreading joy in the world, like just as the best to my ability. And I wanted that to grow within me more and more and more. So once I got through that stage of, I guess, the initial stage of seeing that person in the mirror, realizing this isn't who I want to be. I don't have any confidence. And even when I first started, I talk about the gym because that was really just the first stage of it. But going to the gym, I had no confidence in there. I barely knew what I was doing. My little sister was the one who's training me, which I thank her all the time because she's been this inspiration, almost like a mentor. Funny because, again, she's my little sister. She's been my mentor for a few different areas of life, actually. And it's just worked out great for that. Then you start comparing yourself to others. I can barely lift, whatever it was when I started there, and you see these other guys doing what they're doing. But again, that's when you see the results, you see the growth and the determination to do more and more and more.
I'm curious about, so as you sit here today and you look at an experience like the accident that you got in when you were 22, 23 years old, what is your relationship to that experience? You've talked about it set you on this path of a lot of physical pain, a lot of mental pain, emotional pain, leading you down into depression. And I mean, all these places that it took you. What's your relationship to that accident, that moment in your life? Like when you think back to it and you just kind of look at the role it's played in your life, what comes to mind?
At the time, I would have said it was the worst thing ever that could have happened to me. And for everything that it put me through. Being so far separated from it now, I honestly can't imagine life going any other way. While that was super challenging, had some big negative effects on my life early on, the point it's risen me to through a lot of the growth that came from that. And I say kind of the mantra that I live by was saying yes to opportunity, because just that second chance on life that I got, that has helped push me to do things without thought or just taking too much consideration to it. But even if it is something that I'm afraid of, push yourself to do it anyway. Even today, this conversation here, you and I talked a little bit offline, and I hinted a little bit that this is intimidating to me. There's fear that comes into sitting here and having a vulnerable conversation.
Absolutely.
And truly, I listen to your podcast, and there's people you've had on that have years of experience on me. There's some people that you've had on that I have years of experience on, but all of them I've really enjoyed listening to and have been very inspirational to me. And I sit here thinking about those, and I actually talked about this in my yoga class this past week, about fear. And you've had business owners, you've had authors, life coaches. And then here I am sitting in the same seat as these people. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just a supply chain analyst by day, a yoga teacher by night. How do I find that I'm worthy to have the same conversation? But that's why I have to remind myself is that I do actually have a story to tell as well. I am worthy of sharing that story just as well. And the fear of that, I actually had to sit and think about overnight, like, is this something I want to do? Yes, it is something I want to do. And leaning to that mantra that I live by. say yes to opportunity. And that's what that injury, that accident, all of it like has fed me to live by, is that if something comes up, do it. Do it. Even if sometimes you have to think about it, but do it. You'll be thankful you do. And there's been many things throughout life that I was scared to do, especially over the past 5 years or so. But I went and did it anyway. And it could be from traveling. I've done some amazing travel experiences that I've had. I've done solo trips. I love hiking. Hiking like just connects with my soul, being in nature, being in the mountains, wherever it may be. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. So especially those scenarios, like go see this new state, go see these new sets of mountains, go see whatever it is, just say yes, lean into it. Then there's areas that challenged me as far as growing into new hobbies. Yoga is one of them. Yoga is one of my favorite things in life to practice. And early on, I started doing yoga as just another form of exercise. This was like early on, and well, I don't say early on, later on into my fitness journey. But what was great that came out of that is I shifted the mindset from health and fitness to health and wellness. And yoga had become a big reason of why. The way yoga had inspired me, the more and more that I had done it, the more it grew within me, the more I continued to get the pull to want to do more. And so it started as just a form of exercise. And I mentioned my sister before. She actually had become a yoga instructor years before I did. But I started to go to her classes just to support my little sister in this new journey that she was on. And for years, that's all it was. It was just a form of movement and exercise for me. Then down the line, I get to another point in my life where I'm going through struggles. And this is more of like just a relationship that ended. So I'm looking for something to help me heal, and I just felt the calling. I need a yoga class today. And I go to this yoga class, and everything that was spoken in that class just resonated with me. Talking about healing, being worthy, being enough, letting go, releasing that what doesn't serve you. And that class that I was in, it felt like I was being spoken to. And I said, I need more of this. And the thing about that, or what had kind of transitioned, was not so much the need for or thought of yoga of being just movement. That's when I finally or began to learn that yoga is also about embodied awareness, the inner work, connecting your mind and body, moving, connecting your breath and movement. And that's when I actually fell in love with yoga. So through all of that, like the leaning in, saying yes to opportunity, what had followed, another great one of my life. As I got into yoga, I also started getting into spin. I had the opportunity presented to me of actually teaching spin. And it wasn't anything that I thought. I knew actually I got to the point where I was like, I think I would maybe want to teach yoga one day. But just so far from the thought of like, this is actually something I can do. I've heard great things about yoga teacher training, but it's honestly, it's quite the financial investment to do. It's like, well, okay, maybe one day. But when the opportunity of teaching spin came up, the financial investments wildly, there's miles apart. So I thought, maybe this could be my stepping stone to teaching yoga. What I loved about the spin, the yoga, is that they were filled with inspirational messages always. And that's what the physical activity, the exercise out of it, wonderful. But what I took away really connected with me were the messages of these classes. And I told myself, I want to do this. This is what I want to be able to do for others. So I said yes to that opportunity. It took a little bit. It was actually my girlfriend. She's the one that had first said, like, this is kind of planted the seed in my mind. Like, this is something I think you can do. And at the time I was like, oh, yeah, maybe. And then the conversation went on, and that seed that was planted in my mind just grew and grew and grew until it was like, okay, yes. I had conversations with the owners, and it turned into, they had some excitement in having, is like yoga, spin is a very female dominated practice or activity. So I think they liked the idea of having a male to be able to do it. And I think that was just part of it. I think people often see a sensitive side in me that can shine in these opportunities of teaching. And all of that had led from going back to that pivotal day of my life, that life-changing event of that car accident.
It's always amazing to me how these things can happen to us in our lives. And I'm going to butcher it, but Eileen will often play this, it's like a Chinese proverb. And I don't know if you heard it, but Alan Watts does a good rendition of it, and it's probably on Spotify or something like that where you can find it, but essentially the basis of the proverb is like, a farmer has a son who's riding a horse, and the son falls off the horse and breaks his leg, and then and the horse runs away. And so everyone's kind of like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That's terrible. And then the next day, the horse comes back with 5 other horses, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing!" And each time the farmer is like, "Well, I don't know, maybe." So that's terrible. I don't know, maybe. So then the horses come back. That's wonderful. That's amazing. I don't know, maybe. And then there's like a series of things, and then all of a sudden there's a war, and people have to get drafted to go to war. And then so his son that broke his leg, and people are like, oh, that's terrible. Well, now he doesn't have to get drafted, so he can stay home. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I don't know, maybe. But to me, that proverb, I don't know, it goes and goes, but it highlights how these things can happen in our lives. For you, it was a car accident. For me, it was losing my dad. These things happen, and I think it's so easy to immediately judge and say, this is a terrible thing that's happened to me. But as we're having this conversation and you're talking about all the things that have resulted from what at the time was a terrible thing in your life and led to a lot of difficult experiences, it's amazing to hear. It's also led to a lot of transformation. It's led to you finding a lot of things that are now part of your life that are a core. You talk about your love for yoga, and it's just like, would you have found something like yoga if you didn't go through an experience like that? It's hard to say. I mean, we can't predict that, but it's just powerful to hear you talk about all of the things that experience has led you to. And I think just serves as a reminder for me and for all of us as we go through these sort of relative to our entire lives, these micro experiences that happen, these things that happen to us on a day-to-day basis. It can feel like this is an eternal thing, and these experiences are going to forever affect us, and we're never going to move on from them. And there are these horrible things, and that it's just such a powerful reminder to sit and hear you talk about all the positive that has come from it.
I totally agree. And I have a hard time imagining that things don't happen. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And looking back through the years, I mean, man, this has been 16, 17 years, however long it's been since it happened. It's been a long, long journey. And you look at it, if you look up close, you might feel like, oh, you're not, there's nothing happening. You're just stagnant in this lull or this downtrend. But as time goes on and you pull back and look at a grander scale, healing is not linear, right? You have ups and downs. But as you pull back, I think most times if you continue with the intention that you'll see an upward trend of this healing. And I feel like that's exactly what this course has been for me. Even after all these years, I connect these dots of all the different events, and I can honestly say that this wouldn't happen if this didn't happen before it. If this didn't happen, then that wouldn't have happened before it. So I truly believe in that everything does happen for a reason, and life is short, and that's an area that I can connect with you. I lost my mom at a young age, and it's a reminder that life is short. And I had a lot of growth from that, different circumstances. We had an estranged relationship, a lot of struggles. She had a lot of struggles. And she had a disease. She was an alcoholic. And she went through her struggles. And unfortunately, this was at a pretty young age for me. That put a lot of separation between us. But she also had some big time struggles early on through her life that like I never really considered. And so there was a lot of anger built up in me with my mom for a long time. And she got to the point where she went through rehab. She stopped drinking, and she went through the 12 steps.
Yeah.
Shoot. She went through the steps. And part of that is like giving forgiveness or asking forgiveness. And she did that. And I always will think back, like I barely gave her the time of day to listen to her just because I was so angry with everything that had unfolded leading up to that point. Now, today, thinking back, like I can't be more happy and proud of her for going through that and getting to that place of recovery. And looking back, unfortunately, our relationship never really did reconnect. She went through a lot of depression as well. And the cause of her death was related to everything prior on with her disease. I went through a really hard time after that. First, I grieved. I was sad. Then I became angry again, but for a different reason. I was angry at her for everything that had come before that really was the reasoning for her death.
Yeah.
And then I became angry with myself. I became angry with myself because I can only imagine being a parent and all you want is the love of your children and you want to love your children and not being able to receive that. And she tried, but everything that came with that, I wanted no part of, and which was her disease. So I was angry with myself because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm starting to take blame. Like, I feel like I was a part of the cause of her drinking and anything else that came because she was trying to fill her depression. And I think a big cause of her depression was the broken relationship with her kids. But I had to come to the realization beyond that. There's so much more that led up to that. And you can't take the blame of others' actions. So what was really special that I finally got to the point of all this was the point of forgiveness. And there's so much power in forgiveness. You carrying the weight, before you can give, you're carrying the weight of others, you're carrying the weight of blame. Once you are able to reconcile with all that and forgive, all of that weight is just lifted off of your shoulders. And so when I got to that point in life, and this was in my late 20s, so this is in the midst of everything else going on in my life at that time too. But it wasn't until my 30s, again, that awakening period of my life, where I was finally able to forgive myself and forgive her. And looking back, it's something I will always wish I could tell her, because the older you get, just this life experience, you gain perspective, you learn new things, and you have better understanding of, this is the reason that happened. It's not me to take the blame of it. There's other forces, other reasoning for it. But once I got to the point of forgiveness, it brought so much more peace in my life. And I know without a doubt it would for her as well.
I think that word perspective is such a powerful word. Sometimes it just takes going through more life and experiencing more things before maybe we can gain a little bit of a deeper understanding or get some of that perspective that helps us realize or appreciate what someone might have been going through. As I hear you tell both of those stories, it sounds like, well, you tell me, if some of your experiences in life helped give you that perspective of like, oh, maybe I can understand a little bit more what my mom went through and what she experienced and why, once you went through something that was sort of similar. Is that what gave you the perspective to be able to kind of appreciate her and her experience?
It did. And that was another reasoning of like me needing to separate myself from that lifestyle of just being prescribed the medication I was on, because it was just another sign of like where this could lead. And the farther I got in life and having that perspective and just it's funny because for as long as she's been gone, love has actually grown in my heart more and more, for someone that's been gone for so long. So I'll always be able to look back, and instead of thinking of the dark, I can see the light in it. Because for the longest time, all I would think about was the dark side, the darkness of our relationship. But there was so much greatness. And again, she tried and tried and tried. And then having that better understanding, that perspective, that's truly what was able to bring more peace to myself. And that, again, just that reminder that life is short. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
You talked about early in our conversation, the first question I asked you was about the chapter of life that you're on. What would the title be? And you mentioned it would be, serving others and shining the light onto others. You, in the past couple of years, have taken on, I'm kind of comparing it to like that transformational time in your 30s. You were kind of the student, if you will. You're doing a lot of learning, a lot of transformation of your own, a lot of experiencing things. And in these past couple of years, and as you mentioned the chapter, it was very outwardly other facing, and you've kind of entered into this role as the teacher now.
Yeah.
What has that experience been like? Becoming, teaching spin classes, becoming a yoga instructor, this chapter of serving other people, shining light onto other people. What has that meant for you? Gratitude.
Like, I couldn't be more grateful to be in the position I am in, because through the stage of being the student, I was constantly being inspired, having light shined onto me. And that was kind of what I wanted to take on as becoming a teacher. Like, okay, I want to be able to do this for others now. It's always been inside me to want to have this bright light shined onto the world. And this is now my opportunity. This is the opportunity that I can take, and I have control of taking the reins here and saying yes to these opportunities and having a platform to try to inspire others. I can only hope people come to my classes, whether it was the spin classes then or teaching yoga now, that people take away the same way that I still take multiple yoga classes every week. So I'm still looking for inspiration myself, but to be able to do that to others or for others now, at the end of every class, I always tell everybody, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your practice, because it's an honor to be up there. And I am just filled with gratitude that people are showing up for themselves, but letting me be a part of their practice, allowing to guide them in their practice. And it is the most fulfilling, rewarding thing to be able to be up there and shine that light, And it's almost a state of this conversation we have. This is a vulnerable conversation. it's a state of being vulnerable, because I do like to tie in messages. I like to tie in themes, and I like to often make them not about me, but tie in my own experiences, because I truly think that's what makes them feel like they're more authentic classes. You know, you go to a class and the instructor or teacher, if you're listening to the words and it sounds like that person is being authentic, I think it draws you in more and more. Like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. Everybody goes to classes for their own reasons. But if it is somebody coming in looking for that type of inspiration, it would just fill my heart to be able to do that for someone. So that vulnerability is actually a practice as well. And I'll be honest, part of why this is intimidating to do this, because I'm a sensitive person. I think I honestly get that from my dad. Like, I have a very soft side. I'll choke up at the end of class if I'm talking about something that really means something to me. I'll choke up on my words and I'll laugh it off and get through it. But something special about my dad that really, I just had this realization recently. My dad is a sensitive guy. He is stern when he needs to be, but he always had this softness to him. And I think I get that from him. But also, and this is the part that realization just had come recently. My dad was raised by two women. He was raised by his mom and his grandmother. He didn't have a dad growing up. So I think he learned just how to be a human being from two women. I think just maybe molded that softness into him a little bit. And believe me, my grandma could be stern too. There's no doubt about that. But I do think that probably says something there or shows something there. And then to take that a step further and just thoughts of my dad is never really thinking about, he was never really shown how to be a dad. So, and to me, I love my dad to death. And he was able to raise children without the example of having a father himself. And I give him so much credit for that. I think that's a really special thing, but that's where I think I get that sensitive side from. It probably stems all the way up to there. But the vulnerability is that I try to show in classes I'm not always great at doing. I can have vulnerable conversations with myself all day long. I can recognize where there's pain, where there's healing, where there's happiness, where there's love inside, and have those conversations. Sometimes some of my best conversations with myself, or just like most thoughtful conversation, tell me if this is the same for you, are in the shower. Do you ever realize that?
It's a good spot to reflect.
It is. Sometimes some of my best yoga classes are planned in the shower.
I love it. Yeah.
But so I have those internal conversations all the time. But turning it outward and having those conversations with others, that's hard. I mentioned Kelly McMullen earlier. She said recently in a yoga class, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And that's kind of where the fear can come in, is because all three of those things are scary. But if you lean into it, I think you'll find so much growth, but it is a practice. I think I've only had truly a couple like meaningful relationships in my life. One of them being the one I'm in currently. But I do think the reasons a lot of them failed in the past is because I wasn't very vulnerable. I wasn't very open. And what I love about your podcast here is getting beyond surface level, right? In my 20s, in that sleepwalking phase, I didn't date at all. I was actually, not only was I not sharing or being open, I was hiding a lot. With the challenges and depression that I was having, I internalized a lot of that. Most people didn't know I was going through anything, and I would put this mask on. But because of that, I didn't really I didn't really have my first meaningful relationship until the one I mentioned earlier when I was almost 30 years old. It was just before I turned 30. I didn't have any practice of communicating. I didn't have any practice of being vulnerable. And I think that's like when at 30 years old, that's where I like started learning to walk in terms of communication and being open and being able to get beyond surface level conversation. So that's been a growth as well over the years. And even my girlfriend now, I'm still a work in progress. She'll patiently remind me like, let's get deeper here. I was like, you're right. You know? So it's a practice. And that's why part of the reason why I wanted to lean in, say yes to this opportunity, because I knew I had a story to share. I know that there's these points in life that people may be able to look at, listeners may be able to hear and say, hey, that's me. He got through it. He found a way through this. He found this growth. Maybe that person isn't there yet, but it's an example of what's possible. So the vulnerability, this practice between you and I, is only something that will help me continue to grow. I think that's a really special thing.
I think so too. I mean, it just highlights, so much of the foundation of this show is about people sharing their stories. Those stories and experiences that we have and the things that we go through, that is what, when we share them, it makes us relatable to other people. I love that you bring that into your yoga classes, because that's how we connect with another human, is we need to see some element of ourselves or our own stories or experiences in that person and in what they've gone through. And I just have this foundational belief that I can sit down with anyone. And this is what I tried to say in that conversation that Eileen and I tried to record but didn't record. But I have the foundational belief that I can just sit down across from anyone, and if I listen to their story, there is something that I can gain for my own life experience, whether that is something that they've gone through that I can relate to, a way that they're approaching things, a growth or transformation that they've been through, whether it's going to impact me in my life now, or I always think of it as like putting it in my toolbox for the future in case I run up to something similar. I just continue to find it to be such a rewarding experience to hear someone's story. And that, to me, I think on just a very human level, we all crave that, to be able to not only hear someone's story, but to share our own and to feel like we have the opportunity to be heard and seen. And I finally articulated the other day, maybe for the very first time, that I think that's my hope for this show, is that maybe I can set an example for people of this is what it's like to allow space for someone to share their story. And maybe if people could see me and someone like you entering into a conversation like this, maybe they'd be more willing to try this vulnerability thing, or try this going a level deeper thing for themselves, maybe for the first time.
Absolutely.
And what a beautiful thing that could be.
And I think especially for males, for guys, I think there is a stigma, a toxic masculinity, that like, this is what a guy is supposed to look like. This is what a guy is supposed to do. This is how a guy is supposed to act. And I think, and again, coming from mentioning my dad learning from his grandmother, I think that probably goes back generations of how people are raised, right? And I think with guys, even my friends, like, we'll go out and we'll just talk about sports, we'll talk about news, we'll talk about just whatever, which is fine, but it's very rare that you get into the vulnerable conversations. But that doesn't mean the person sitting across from you isn't going through something very similar. And I think in situations like that, again, for guys, because I think a lot of people are guys are shown that you're not supposed to show emotion. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be fearless. You're supposed to just be all these different things. And that doesn't mean that others, the person sitting across from you, isn't going through something similar. And I think you can only heal, grow, get better by opening up and sharing. And I think this is why I feel it's so great what you're doing, is because it just takes one person to start the conversation. And if I said, man, this is what I'm going through, I'm having a hard time with this, the person sitting across from me can maybe say, man, you know what? I've been going through that too. And like that's stepping into that deeper conversation, that vulnerability, but allowing space to whatever it might be, heal, grow, whatever it is. So just having that conversation, being able to start the conversation, I think goes such a long way. And that's what I love about, that's honestly another part of what I love about doing yoga, teaching yoga, is because it is such a female dominated practice, but there's so much to gain out of it. Actually, yoga was created by men. The philosophy of yoga, the practice of yoga was created by men. But I think a lot of people, guys, will look at it and say, it's a female practice.
Yeah.
Or just come up with reasons why it doesn't fit them. I can't move that way. I don't have that flexibility. Well, saying things like that is like, I'm sick, but I'm not going to take medicine for it. You know, that yoga is what helps those things. And tying back to my early 30s, when I was just all about going to the gym and working out, all I was doing was locking up my muscles, locking up my joints, losing mobility and flexibility. And that's just one part of yoga. So there's so many benefits in yoga. And I love to be able to be an example of a male in the yoga world. Hopefully inspiring other guys. I love when I see other guys at yoga, because it's just seeing other people that are maybe having that same connection with it that I had. Maybe other guys finding that vulnerability to take away from yoga the same way that I did, finding the same growth, the same healing, whatever it may be for that person, but the same way I did. So I like to be able to be an example of, this is a guy doing yoga. Oh, I can do yoga too. That's my hope, you know?
I think it's cool how, as we wrap up the conversation, you talked about one of the big changes that you made in your life was starting to say yes to opportunity. And it's neat to hear about the different ways in which you have said yes to opportunity. And now, as you step into more of that teacher role, I think it's neat that you provide an opportunity for other people to say yes to. And you can instill that same mindset into someone else. And I think that's powerful if it's another guy, as you just talked about. I think these types of conversations where two men can sit down and talk about these things, I think is very important. It's one of the reasons I also love doing this. But it could be for anyone. You're providing that opportunity for someone to say yes. I think that's a really awesome thing. And I appreciate you saying yes to this opportunity to have a conversation, because as I said to you before we started recording, that's what this whole thing starts with is two people, you and I, have to say yes to entering into this space together. And I just continue to find that amazing things happen when two people say yes to that. So I want to say thank you for that. I want to end on, you've got a Joshua Tree shirt on, and one thing that we share in common is a love for travel.
Yes.
Do you have another trip planned at the moment of where you might be going, or what's next on Brian's travel horizon?
It's funny you say that. Nothing is actually planned at this moment. My friends and I, we kind of have a tradition where we go somewhere for March Madness every year, because I am as soft as I am and try to be in a lot of these areas. I do love things like sports and things like that, but March Madness has been a tradition for the past probably 10 years to go somewhere for the first round of the tournament. So some details still working out there. My girlfriend really wants to go somewhere, do some traveling. So her and I have been talking about trying to figure something out, but nothing is set in stone yet.
Okay.
Though I'm always looking forward to that next adventure, because that's one of my favorite things in life is experiencing different places, experiencing different cultures. I feel like that's like what we're meant to do in life is experience. And that's truly what feeds my soul. And I think you should always lean in to what feeds you. I was thinking about this the other day. So we're recording at my house here, and this plant behind me, this is a housewarming gift from your wife, Eileen, when I moved in here about 2 years ago. Funny side story. She asked me, what are you going to name it? And I'm thinking like, in my yoga mind was thinking prana, just something silly, but prana means life force or breath in Sanskrit, and plants, they create oxygen for us. She goes, no. You name a plant, you name it your name. So name it Brian, because when you look at it, you are reflecting, you see that plant grow, and that is representative of your own growth. I was like, very Eileen thing to say, but I loved it. I was like, you're right. So this is Brian. But if you look at it, all of the leaves are turned in towards the window to feed off of what makes it grow. And I think that same thing of leaning into those things that feed your soul and make you grow. So kind of a windy road off of where is traveling going to lead me next, but always somewhere, because I can't go too long without going someplace and feeding my soul in that way.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think travel has played a similar role in my life. It's one of the reasons I love it, is that exposure to new things and new people, new places. I'm looking forward to hitting the road again here soon so that we can get some more of that in our lives again. So I'll look forward to your next adventure as well.
I appreciate it. I always love seeing your journey. And I just want to say one more time how much I love what you are doing here. There's a quote from a show. Have you ever seen Ted Lasso?
Yeah.
Love the show. One of my favorite shows. And he says, he's actually quoting Walt Whitman in the show, but he says, be curious, not judgmental. And that's what I feel like you are doing here. You're being curious of other people's stories, zero judgment, but you're allowing to share and hopefully make that human to human connection and inspire others. So I appreciate you as well, Chad, and what you do.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
that means a lot. I think curiosity is definitely the driver behind whatever this thing is that I've created. But I appreciate you recognizing it, and thank you again for saying yes to this opportunity. It's been special.
It has. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the show today. If you want to find Brian and connect with him online, you can do so on Instagram at Brian Rogers1, BrianRogers, at Brian Rogers1 on Instagram. And if you happen to be in the Michigan area or the Metro Detroit area, or maybe more specifically in the Brighton area, you can find Brian leading yoga classes at the Brighton Yoga Center. As always, I'm incredibly grateful for your attention and for tuning into the show, hearing these conversations. My ask of you, my wish for you, of you, if that makes sense, is to take this concept of a level deeper, sitting down with someone and asking them about their story and about their life. Take that and apply it to your life. Have a conversation with someone. Lean into curiosity. Ask someone that you've known some different question and see if you can learn something about them. That's my challenge to you for this week. Otherwise, I will be back next week with another new interview. I'm excited to share it with you, and I'll see you then.